What a week it's been, as we have virtually traveled around the globe in celebration of International Women's Day, celebrated earlier this week. We've been to cities in the Americas. We've been down under in Sydney, Australia. We've talked about the future of work, identity, collaboration, culture, allyship, breaking down barriers, and breaking down biases. I'm Theo Sibia, partner and managing director of Carney Africa, and welcome to the City of Gold, Johannesburg. Before I hand over to our new senior advisor at Carney and a good friend of mine, Joanne Paul, your host for the next 60 minutes, where she will continue to explore the theme of purpose and legacy, I would like to first of all just share a few perspectives that I have on the critical topics of today's discussion. Firstly, I would like to bring attention to the fact that the rate of change in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion has been far too slow. All too often, organizations have taken the view that diversity, equity, and inclusion is around a set of initiatives, and they roll out these initiatives and hope that there will be change. As we know, hope is not a strategy. We need to do more. If we're to move the needle on the women's agenda, we need to ensure that the agenda is part of who we are, what we stand for, what we believe. It must be infused in our purpose. It must be a part of our DNA. With that, I'd like to hand over to Joe and our esteemed guest to take us into the conversation, and I hope you enjoy the time that you spend with us today and look forward to the engagement and questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. An apt introduction to the 11th annual Carney International Women's Day program. As we navigate our way through and hopefully out of the pandemic, now more than ever, diversity, equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging and a commitment to delivering on it is key. We must make DEI part of our design brief in terms of how we solve for challenges, not just for our clients, but for ourselves, our communities, and the world. It's about living, being bold for change, each for equal, choose to challenge, and this year, break the bias. We have not progressed, as mentioned, far enough nor fast enough in the spaces. Perhaps that's why allyship was chosen as word of the year in 2021. Allyship maybe, sponsorship too. So the past 3 days, we've seen some really good conversations, and honest conversations is one of the ways we can take this forward. And with this as the backdrop to today's conversation, plus the beautiful Sandton City behind us, I wanted to talk through our panelists and welcome you to the event this morning. Portia Darby, the Group Chief Executive of Transnet. You've held senior positions in government for almost 2 decades through a major economic reform. It speaks volumes. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Lee Naik, CEO of Big Data and Insights-driven TransUnion Africa. You're responsible for a portfolio of businesses across 8 countries that help us make better decisions. Plus, you're a real-time thought leader in terms of digital trends. More than that, advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and good friend. Good to have you here today. Liz Letswalo, founder of Masadi Organics, also having come out of management consulting, worked with multinationals on strategies and operational pieces, and a long history of success, and then starting your own business that really has shifted the dial on more equitable, realistic, thoughtful standards around beauty that's empowering and leading. Thank you. Good to have you here. Then on the end we have from Nando's, Linda Reddy, very good to have you here, the head of supply chain. For the past 8 years, you've driven an incredible business across 17 countries, 450 various restaurants, some that obviously have been closer to us at home. I love your motto. It's not just about making money, it's about having fun. And so really, really living. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you for making time this morning. Good to have you here. Also then, welcome to our virtual guests. Please note you can post questions in the chat. We will take them during the Q&A session. We are also running on our generator capacity. We currently have load shedding, but serendipitously, it actually stops after our event. So looking forward to having you engaged throughout. And then to the audience in this, I almost want to say our studio audience, but to our live, to the people that have made it here this morning, thank you very much for making the time to meet in person. Looking forward to an engaging event and to really shifting the dial on how we take this from being once off to more regular engagements in the space. So let's get going. So each of us has a role to play in creating a space where people feel seen, they feel heard, and able to be themselves. We all play a role in what makes businesses and the communities we live in sustainable, agile, more so anti-fragile going forward, with human capital at its core. Always enabled by technology, but still, we are people first. And so often we say to everyone, come to work as your authentic selves, show up as you, but is that the reality? And so with that, I think Alvin Toffler, who's a futurist, said to us, the illiterate of the 21st century are those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so maybe we can start with some DEI initiatives that, from a first-hand experience perspective, have been tick box exercises and not so successful, and why. So Linda, can we start with you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. It's good to be here. It's good to see the audience as well. I think for me, where I've seen initiatives, particularly around diversity, inclusion, equity, work well is when it's being conscious, when it's something that, whether it's the executive team, the leadership team, that really want to make a difference, and they're happy to get diverse ideas, get different groups of people to come together and make a difference in the organization. Where I see it doesn't work is when you have a stock standard program, and as Joe, as you said, you go and say, just implement this program and let's do this in the next 3 years. And the reason why I say it needs to be conscious, because it needs to come from the hearts. Where we see that it doesn't work well when it's a program, and then you know you got some metrics that you need to deliver on, and then you wonder, why aren't I achieving these goals? But you're not achieving the goals because you haven't brought the people along with you. How do you bring the woman along? How do you bring the diverseness, the differenceness that comes? Are we building a culture where we're allowing people to make mistakes? Are we building a culture where we say, yes, we want more women in certain roles in the organization, but do it in a very conscious manner? So that's just something that I've noticed, where it needs to come from the heart, from the leadership team.
It needs to be felt, I think, in
Correct.
terms of how you live it. Maybe if you can tie into that around things that haven't worked, because Liz, you've been privileged enough to work through the consulting space, then start your own business in the back end. So what have you seen off the back of that, where it has been that tick box metric space and not worked, and why?
I think I've seen DEI initiatives that are driven at a business level and not at a human level. And we have to have the human conversation primarily in order to understand why we have the need for DEI initiatives to begin with. I think we need to lift our heads from our businesses and look around the world and say, what do we see? Business is a subset of society. Our companies are a subset of the world. We need to actually look up and say, hang on, what is happening here is actually the same thing that is happening in the world. In the most vulnerable of situations, we've seen human beings be unable to actually empathize with subsets of people. An example being what has been happening in Ukraine, right? In that case, it wasn't so much men and women, it was black and white people. We cannot want to have the DEI conversation without wanting to talk about race. We cannot want to have the DEI conversation without wanting to talk about gender. We cannot have that conversation without wanting to confront our own homophobia or homophobic views that we hold. We cannot have that without wanting to confront the fact that we are actively excluding people that are living with disabilities. In some shape or form, a lot of us have internal biases, and that's where we need to start. You cannot say, at a business level, there's KPIs, there's this. Yes, but why do you have more men in this organization than women? Why do you have more white people in this organization than black people? In a country that has 80% black population, that is the human conversation that primarily needs to be had. And then once that is done, we can get into the business initiatives and the DI initiatives at an honest level.
So it is about being aware of where you are.
Absolutely.
Actually, the human being in that space. And I often laugh when you fill in a form and it says race, I want to write human, and then do the next step in the bucket. So I think that is key. It's around why it doesn't work, what you've seen, the fabric of society. Maybe, Portia, just your views before we move into a different topic.
I'm too old, actually.
Experienced, not old.
No, I like my age. Because when I started work, we didn't have any of that. It wasn't an issue, it wasn't a question. I'm not going to say the name of the bank because I've embarrassed them enough times over the years. But I spent 3 months in my youth when I started working, literally 3 months from university in a bank in Joburg. And at the end of the 3 months, why I left, one day as I was walking down the street for the 9th time, I met the hawker again at the corner, who was always selling when I was getting into the office. And the thought which had been slowly coming to me is that you did economics for this guy. I was working in the international economics area inside the bank. You didn't do it for those people that you work with. One, so, and at the bank as well where I worked, I was the only black person in the economics team. And I'd be on time. Every Monday morning we had a 7 o'clock meeting. I'd be there at the table. And the boss would say, wow, black people always late. Hello, the only black person that works for you is here. So why are you asking me that question, right? So I suppose, and then immediately after that went to work in government. And the thing I say to Balisa and anybody who I work with is that the privilege of my life is being in a transition generation. Yes. Because we had to come in and you had to, so I don't know this stuff. So I had to go and call a friend, like that. And I said, what's your lived experience? And I think, Liz, everybody, the points that you raised for me echo completely my perspective as well, is that if we don't increasingly get to a point of being real about where do we live, the people we have, and then start looking around, do we have them all? My kids keep on saying to me, these biases, not only homophobia, but gender non-binary people. Do we, can we even get there, right, to that conversation? Yes. Do we even know what we've got to say around that? So I would be with Linda 1000%, is that when you have an initiative and you're ticking a box and you don't have any support mechanisms, you're not for real. My other one, which it drives me absolutely up the pole, is language. In South Africa, we have decided that if you speak like me and you have my accent, you're smart, you're intelligent. If you come in and you speak English and you Venda and there's Zulu coming in there, you're not intelligent. I'm sorry, eThekwini. I'll put it out there. We have to stop that rubbish. Because in fact, the day we are serious about inclusion is the day that I can come in with my Zulu and speak to whoever in the company, and we separate, because this is what happens in the civilized world, right? In Thailand, the workers are spoken to in Thai. You go to the port and you have somebody who's technical who explains to you how the port works in Thai, and somebody else translates you to English. In South Africa, if we ever did that and had somebody explaining to you in Venda or Zulu or whatever how a thing works, that's not the sharpest person in town. So we promote also on the most banal point of a foreign language, which for most of us is the 4th or 5th language. And suddenly that is the standard. So for me, if we're serious, we really have to get down to those kinds of issues as well.
So we almost need to understand the market we're in, the country we're in, the people we have, Absolutely. The inclusiveness of all people, because the opportunity to include you when we have 11 official languages is not the case if everything is in English.
Absolutely.
So it's an interesting dynamic around personal reflection and making a contribution to a country that is still in transition, and what could that look like? And maybe then that brings me, I suppose, to a question to you, Lee. We still celebrate so hotly the first African board member, the first lady on the board, the first female entrepreneur. For me, what scares me in that is we haven't come far at all if we are still celebrating so many firsts versus doing something different. And if we think about Herbert Smith-Freewell's did a study around saying that social activism is likely to be on the rise in 2022 with employees. Outside of that, 67% want more diversity, but before they even choose an employer, and that's of the Glassdoor piece, they want to know what your diversity stats look like and your equity and inclusion. Their purpose around who they work for and is meaningful is key. And then people in their own businesses, 50% said they wanted more done. So that talks about where you are at a point in time. So maybe in your on the 5th anniversary of your CEO role, and congratulations at TransUnion, you still innovate, you solve problems that really matter. Talk through building a team and the team dynamics over that period, specifically because you've navigated through COVID and meeting them and what it looks like is quite different. What got TransUnion to where it is from a DI perspective, the lessons learned, and
Sure.
what next?
Well, maybe some stats, right? I do work in a data organization, so maybe some stats.
We'd expect stats, right?
So my business, I look after businesses in 8 different countries. My business is 57% female, 43% male. My executive leadership that runs the entire region is 50-50 male and female, and 44% of all management are female. The journey is not done. We're well in progress. That's where we are today. You know, when you look back at the stats...
Can we just pause and say well done? Because I don't think you often hear stats like that. And especially in the geographies you're in. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. And you know, I look after 8 different countries, and most of the country leads are all female. So the truth is that it can be done. So as a man, and I do know you skipped over me, I noticed that.
I didn't exclude you on purpose.
So I guess it's something that's an obligation. You know, Portia used the word privilege, and I think it's a privilege to be a leader. In my previous employer, a recruiter would call me the reluctant hire. It took me 7 months to say yes to the job I have today. And because I wasn't sure I wanted to leave a position I was very comfortable in to take a new job, because it's difficult to be a leader, as any of the people up on the stage would tell you, it's very difficult. One of my requirements for taking the job was I needed my shareholders to understand this word called black economic empowerment, right? And why privilege is an important word is that when we're gone with our current role, we're beyond the current role, we won't get remembered for our profit and our loss and our margins and our revenues. We'll think about, hey, what impact did Lee leave on the legacy of the organization? What did Linda do? What did Liz do? What did Portia do? What did Joanne do? We all have the burden of responsibility to say, in a transitionary period, when we were there, what would we do? Were we spectators or did we own it? So for me, at the very start, Joe, I said to myself, if I had to take on a role outside of my comfort zone, where I spent 20 years in my previous organization, it had to be something where I could be part of realizing the economic potential. Now, for me, it sounds a bit odd, but why I took the job was, as a leader in a continent where everyone says, it isn't a great place. You know, there's some really choice words that we talk about when we talk about Africa. But I'm an African because Africa's in me, right? Each one of us is why we're here. We love the potential in our continent. But for us to realize the potential requires diverse views, diverse experiences, different cultures, where we grew up, how we went about it, whether it's Venda, English, Zulu, or Hindi for that matter, it's different perspectives. And I think the culture that I've approached is one to say, okay, it's okay if we don't know what it is today at a point in time. The starting point is to educate people as to why D&I is important. Yeah. So you've heard me talk on stage many times over. I'm the ultimate sponsor of D&I. And I'm actually verbal about it. When I talk at my town halls, we need more black Africa, we need more black colored. We have way too many Indians, right? It's that level of transparency. You've got to own this topic. And the results are clear. I have a highly engaged workforce. You know, the last engagement score we did a couple of months ago, 91% engaged workforce in the middle of a pandemic, right? We have people that want to work, they choose to work with us. We've been awarded the last 2 years the best top employer to work for. These are things that take many, many hard years. And I think it's easy for us to say as leaders, we're going to drive the profit, we're going to drive the revenue growth. But if we do it as leaders with a team around us, we actually propel all of us forward. It's my fervent hope that when we do such things as leaders, we don't just move the dynamic of the organization, we create this potential in people to say, Portia sees me for who I am. Lee sees me for who I am. I can be more. Someone believes in me. And in a country like South Africa, where we have such high unemployment at 34.9%, people want to see that we can see them for who they are. See me for the Lee I am, not for the fancy language I have. See me for the potential I have. And that's the reality of who we are. And that's the story of D&I. It's a commitment. It's a behavior. It's a habit. You don't say today is D&I day from 12 to 1, but from 1 p.m. we go back to the old business. It's a commitment. It's a habit. It's cultural. Each one of us needs to show up with purpose and conviction to make D&I a reality.
And I think aptly said, it's actually a verb. D&I is about action, orientation, doing something that is different and how you do it. I do love the fact that if you have the right culture, and you've talked about that, that's when people can give you discretionary effort. You can really only make a difference if you feel that the environment is safe, allows you to be you, allows you to voice an opinion. So I think some fantastic examples. It'd be nice afterwards to share a little bit more around what that looks like.
I must just say very briefly, we always say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And for lunch, and for dinner, and for tea time. If you get the culture right, if people want to come to work, there's nothing you cannot do as an organization.
And you can bottle it. I think that if you want to, is very, very different. And maybe to your point, there's no silver bullet, right? It's not one thing that's going to get it all done. It's almost incremental in the space. As James Clear always says, the extra 1% will be substantially higher at the end. But the public sector statistics still show it more positively skewed. So in the global survey that was done last year, public sector actually, South Africa featured the best. We had 44% female MPs, best in the world. From a private sector perspective, we dropped to 7th, so 28.5%, so not quite there yet. So there is definitely work to do. But what's interesting for me, and that's 28.5% on the women in boards, on JSE entities, and then 40. But Portia, from your perspective, what I wanted to understand is, given the public sector organization that you lead, and I think it's really important the words we use, not lead as a woman, that you lead, full stop. In the roadblocks that you've encountered or the lessons that you've learned, what comes next? So do you approach it differently given how far you've come, or what are the options?
Well, we've not come far enough. I mean, we in numbers, true. We don't have a diversity problem in the broad category of, because race matters in as much as everything else. On the gender side, we've also made some serious changes at the leadership level. The next has definitely got to be organizations which, as I say, is that for me, my big one now is in South Africa. My argument is that to get to full potential of every single one of us, we've got to lift the lid on language. We have to lift the lid on language. I worked briefly in a consulting engineering company, and that got me to see the advantage that Afrikaans-speaking people have, especially in that environment. And where if I'm Afrikaans-speaking, I don't understand, and I'm a kid. I'm one of the junior engineers, and there's because the real-life questions are not theoretical questions, and I don't understand, and I speak Afrikaans. I'm able to go to the senior engineer, and he speaks to me or she speaks to me in Afrikaans. The mother tongue, the language that I grew up and I suckled on, is the language that I understand best in. But when you're an African kid, your boss is an Afrikaans speaker, and you need somebody to explain to you in Zulu or whatever it is, and you have no possibility to have that explained. And it's unfortunate in South Africa that we're not honestly dealing with this question of language. Now, I reckon if we're going to walk away from all of our languages, every single one of us must walk away, right? And then we must make sure that we're teaching English so that we know English, but it's not the case. It's not happening. I mean, Afrikaners get the opportunity to retain the language. Is that why are we not? So I think for me, it's interesting. I mean, I recently, in an operational environment, you have what is called SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures, right? So there's a machine that was driving us crazy in Richards Bay. And so I ask Johan to do me a favor and get it. Johan, let's you and I read it. Do we understand what we're supposed to do with that thing? So I read it, and I was like, when I'm finished, I said, geez, I know English, and I don't know what you're telling me to do. So that's one of the challenges, is the translations. So we've started vast teams, and I say, go and translate that SOP into the dominant language of the people who work with the machine. Because that is inclusion. Inclusion is not a number. Inclusion is when you've brought me in, do you enable me to succeed?
So it's an interesting dynamic if you say that, because they say diversity is about being invited to the dance floor and inclusion is about being asked to dance. And the same kind of analogy is if it's not my music or not how I know, I stand on the outskirts because I can't participate. And here the language barrier is very similar, because I'm also maybe more comfortable asking a question or acknowledging what I don't know with someone that I have an inherent connection with from a language perspective. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think the option around solving that, around having SOPs in the language that the employer or the employee is working in, is an empowering and enabling space, and also sets a different example for the team around them, around solving problems. Often you see rooms start with various dynamics and tensions, and then people will have different conversations, and when that happens, you default to what's a mother tongue or where you're most comfortable. Yeah. Interesting space.
I mean, so just so what, and I think companies, because there's a responsibility on companies as well, is that we need to find a way, because I say in Transnet, okay, let me deal with the translation fact, is that after at least, most importantly, you understand how the thing works, it's not going to break down on your revenue and bottom line thing. I'm going to hit it on that side. So if I'm hitting it on that side, it's a small cost to then sort of make sure that when you've written your Spanglish or whatever, because people do write Spanglish, and then when you got your Spanglish, I then have a team to convert the Spanglish into an English that people can understand. Yeah.
Makes a big difference. Linda, I see you nodding quite vividly there and smiling. Your thoughts, specifically in 17 different countries?
Yeah, it's interesting, Portia. I'm just going to build a little bit more on what you said on this word responsibility. And I do agree, our leaders, our shareholders, our community all have a responsibility to act on this. But what is responsibility? Responsibility is the ability to respond. And I'm just going to shift this around a little bit, and I'm saying, what is the responsibility or the ability to respond that we have as women? How are we looking at ourselves and saying, I want this, I want that, there's this excuse, men don't do that, the leaders don't do that, and I've heard it, and I've been there, and I've made the excuses myself. Trust me. Until I came to a point, I just want to bring this down very personal, until I came to a point and said, what is some of the areas where I don't feel confident in myself? I have fears, the platform is there, I have the opportunities, but I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like I can do that. And I've come across this with women, I've come across this with men, but let's bring it down to women, because this is International Women's Day to celebrate ourselves. And I think that's where, for me, it is also an important part. So how do we look at ourselves? How do we say, how do I have more self-love? How do I make a difference in terms of my learning abilities? How do I create more for others? How do I make a difference in myself? And how do I make a difference in others? Because it's easy to sit and say, I blame. Just something interesting, when I was working in the bank and when I was at Nando's, we started something called an innovation program. And the innovation program says, come up with ideas of how you can make a difference in the organization. On our first year of the program, 99% of those ideas come from another department. Someone's not doing this right, someone's not doing that right. And then we switched this around and said, let's look at what you can make a difference in your world. Because it's easy for us to just say, that's not working, that's not working. So for me, it's just a call to action of women to say, what can I do for myself? What are some of the areas that I can make a difference in? How do I make myself important? How do I go forward and say, in a very authentic manner, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I don't like the way you treat me. How often do we do that? And we don't in most cases. But why? Because there's elements of fear in us. There's elements where I just don't have the confidence. So Joe, just something to just turn around and say, how can we bring this back to our whole self?
I also think sometimes we're comfortable with the fact that we're catching up. And so we allow the fact that we're catching up to let things slide, whether it's around language, statistics, the drive, what you can do. But if you're not comfortable where it is, and actually we push past that comfort zone, what you're saying is we own a lot of shaping that space. So volunteering to translate, volunteering to take someone through the process, or asking or putting your hand up in a space that says, I don't like how you've said that, and tackling it. I think we do a lot offline, which is not what you want to do if you're going to really solve a dynamic. But then if I come to you, Liz, and maybe we've seen that there's been quite a bit of resource that you can throw behind it when you're in a big organization. We've spoken about banks, about Nando's, about Transnet, about TransUnion, etc., in terms of really putting our money where our mouth is, I suppose, to a large degree around D&I. But when you're a business owner and a founder of a business, has your experience of what the resourcing available is like been different as you transitioned from working with multinationals and in management consulting to the founder of a very successful business?
So I'm just going to ask a clarifying question. Resourcing to support DEI or resourcing for the business?
Both. So how would you resource your business, and how do you deliver on diversity, equity, inclusion, which means people want to be working with you, buying from you?
Yeah. I think what I discovered quite quickly was what I call the penalty of solving the problems that are aimed at alleviating minority groups. when I tell people, oh, I do beauty and wellness products that centers black people and black women in particular, there's a eye roll or a bit of a deflation typically that follows, simply because people don't respect that space as an intelligent space. It's not tech, it's not edgy, it's not, But as a black woman, any black woman in this room might actually know that to find a product that you believe lives up to the expectation of what you want to show up to the world as for yourself is quite rare. And as a black woman, you will know that we still have incredibly toxic chemicals that we use that have been proven to cause cancer and essentially degrade our bodies very quickly, which is a real issue that hasn't been solved. As a black woman, you will know that the images that you see on social media, on billboards, in the shopping shelves, whatever it is, represents nothing like what we look like. And when you go into this kind of space and you're trying to raise funding for this kind of initiative, it's like, another one, right? So that's been the challenge, which then leads to bootstrapping. I made the first batch of products in my kitchen. For the first year and a half, even when I got retail deals, I was still making the products with hand tools as a sole entrepreneur, no team. From sales and marketing, from meetings with buyers for retail deals, from manufacturing and formulation, from social media management, everything I did myself and I had to learn, building the website, everything. And then over time, once the business is growing, I have a team of all women in the business. There was no money thrown into it. It was not tricky. In fact, it was intuitive. It made sense. Those three women over there are my colleagues from Masuri Organics. Kim, I'll tell you, I've worked with her in one of the multinational organizations. Incredible, brilliant, and experienced in strategy and operations. She did not have to convince me of a DEI kind of reason why she had to join. I begged her and said, please, you have to come because we want to work with you. Kim and I have worked in the same team at a certain point at the multinational that I'm speaking about. I've never seen her walk barefoot in the office, and I believe she's never seen me walk barefoot in that office. But today, Kim every day is walking around without shoes, and then every time when I have a meeting, Kim, where's my shoe? It's over there. And I'm highlighting this to say there's a sense of safety that we do not speak about that is cultivated by a genuinely inclusive space, or a space that is created with a genuine sense of bring yourself as you are. We hear this a lot in large organizations, but it is not true. When you try to bring yourself as you are as a woman, there's consequences. And women, a lot of the times in leadership positions in society, in big businesses, only have one shot. Don't F it up. Act right, get everything right. Every mistake is fatal for a lot of women. I've seen that destroy confidence over time in people who came into large organizations, rock stars, and they leave as a fraction of what they came in as, simply because of organizations that want to squash you in the name of performance. And simply in the name of organizations that, quite frankly, have not confronted the fact that they see women in a different way, that they treat women in a certain way. And I think it's also interesting that when you don't believe that you are treating women lesser than men, then how are you even going to begin to change that problem? And I'll tell you about another story of what I call the stones that builders refused, which is very, probably would resonate a lot with the story of South Africa with unemployment. A lot of people don't want to hire, if a black woman, and I'm gonna put you on the spot, not Kolo, she's got matric, she's a supply chain intern at Masuri Organics. Absolutely incredible, let me tell you. When she came into the business, she was coming in as, admin or whatever. I said, no one is going to do admin here. You are going to tell me what your goal, kind of like dream job within the context of this organization would be. Let's get you that. She said, okay, I think I like, something more tangible. And again, the language conversation you spoke about, because of the lack of experience, there's no language to say, I think I like supply chain. I think I like quality assurance. But from the language, I could pick up, I think this is what you mean. I said, we're going to make you run around the entire place and figure out what it is that resonates with you. Today, she's one of the most incredible people I know, one of the most sharpest minds I know, incredible on Excel, incredible on systems and whatever. Anyone who would have described her as a generic sort of like black box person, would have said, yeah, there's a skills problem, there's a gap, there's whatever. You know, there's a bit of empowerment that still needs to happen. There was none of that. Within 3 weeks, Notkolo was on the ground running like no one else. And if it's typically a man who doesn't have a qualification and who is, you know, interesting or who, you know, wants to try different things, they're given the opportunity and they're labeled as quirky or contrarian. You know, yeah, he didn't quite like the whole formal education thing. He just wanted to carve out his own path. But if it's a woman, it's a uneducated, unqualified, inexperienced. And I have seen, Notkolo is not the only case study, by the way, with Masuri Organics. Sarah over there is incredible, sales and marketing. You have Kitumeti, who was unemployed for 11 years. When she came into Masuri Organics, it was her first job. Today, when you look at each and every Masuri Organics product, it is written Kitumeti Malepe's name on it because she's brilliant. She came in, she learned, we made the stuff together, and now she's running it.
So I love your passion. It's fierce in terms of spaces. And the reality around some of that is that the language we use and speak has impacted what some of that looks like. Outside of that, if I take your lessons learned and the stories shared, is there is opportunity if you embrace it. And sometimes I think historically we've been taught to keep our heads down and work hard. And what you need more of is advocates or sponsors that actually advocate for you because you've got the potential. And often we've said a sponsor is someone that has worked with you before, says you've got a track record, has done well. Now it's about the glint in your eye, the fact that you've got some of the tools. If you were skydiving and you had a parachute on your back, I'd push you out. But that's a very different belief faction in terms of what people can do, any person. And actually our diversity opportunity allows people to show up as they are, male or female, gender neutral in the spaces. And I think that environment is quite key. The question what you said actually was, it makes sense. And that's where the template or the blueprint is quite different. What makes sense? And maybe if I can transition from that and off the back of the fact that everyone is going to be looking out for Masori beauty products just on the sideline here. Yeah. And plus Linda's from supply chain, so be careful in the later conversation.
I was thinking of that.
But it's interesting around the statistics and what the statistics say. And for all of them around some of the recent surveys we've done, the one thing that has stagnated is inclusion. It has stayed the same over the years. So how people feel, and that is very much their perception, is their reality, hasn't really shifted. And we've talked through what we've done across multiple countries in TransUnion in a short space of time, to be frankly. We've talked through the pieces uncovered in basic elements around saying, well, if you don't know how to use it and you can't understand it, how do we enable? And lifting the lid on language. Talked about opportunity and seeing what someone could do because you allowed them to pick what their passion could be and run with it. And if you think about that off the back of what 2021 was like and the number of countries that Nando's is in, as well as the restaurants you work with, it's been a little bit like climbing a mountain. And sometimes we look back and we haven't come quite as far, and maybe we're still at base camp as far as Kili goes. But you've climbed Kilimanjaro. And tell me, in the preparation and the build-up for climbing a real mountain, what did you reflect on around some of the mountains on your journey, given the conversation we've had so far?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So, I'm going back and I'm thinking now, this is January 2021. We've had a really tough year of COVID. We had to work from home. It was long hours. I actually forgot when was work and when was personal. If you guys remember those days, it wasn't 2 years ago. But what I did is I took the opportunity to just say, I am thankful. I'm thankful for a few things. We're in a country, as Lee has mentioned, of really excessive high unemployment. And I've got a job. People lost their jobs during the period. Some people, their pays were cut. But I said, I'm really thankful. I have a job. I work for an amazing company with amazing shareholders. We've got an amazing culture. I'm thankful for my health. I'm thankful for my family. But also, I'm thankful for being a woman, having this opportunity and having this privilege that I have. Because in certain countries around there, in fact, quite a few countries, women are not even allowed to work. I go to Saudi often, I go to India, where there's just so many restrictions. And we just got to look at ourselves and to the women in the audience and to the women out there listening to me and just say, I'm thankful that I've got this privilege of working. So I went through that and I said, these are all the things that I'm thankful for. How can I now make a difference? In my career, I've had to go through so many mountains. There were times when males in senior leaders in the organization just wouldn't talk to me. They'll talk to my boss, who's the male, and they'll leave me out. But this is where the culture, and as Portia and Liz have spoken about, how leaders can make a difference where you empower women. Because it helped me, where it empowered me, where he empowered me, and I'm thankful for that. I can even see with A.T. Carney, you've got Theo Sibier as your leader, and I can see how he's empowering this team. But coming back to January 2020, it was just saying all these things I'm thankful for, but then the question I had is, how do I then challenge myself? How do I do something more? How do I do something more for myself, for my health, my well-being? And that's when I said, okay, let's do something big and bold. Let's climb the highest mountain in Africa. And the second thing is I said, how can I give back to society? Because I'm thankful for so many things that I do have. And that's when I get involved with an organization called Trek for Mandela. And a big initiative was giving sanitary pads to girls that just don't have access to sanitary pads. And the stats show in South Africa that these girls don't have access to sanitary wear, and they just miss school for an entire week. And missing school puts them in the back foot. It impacts their confidence, because one day we want to make these girls leaders also in society as well. So I said, I'm going to be climbing for these girls. So that sort of took me to this journey. It allowed me to push myself to my point earlier on. It was my ability to respond. It was quite a big thing that I'm doing. I haven't climbed big mountains like this before. And pushing myself in training and saying, you know what, how, despite all the odds, how can I do it? But I think what really kept me going is to know that I'm doing this for a purpose. And then to turn things around and going and giving the sanitary wear to these girls in these underprivileged communities who just don't have access to it. You know how heartwarming it is for a woman to be climbing a mountain, doing something challenging, but also doing it for other women as well. So that Joe, was really quite heartwarming. And in many ways, it also dealt with some of the mountains that I had to deal with within myself.
I love that, and I think the reality around how do you give back ties very much into where the world is around a purpose. Your purpose from a personal perspective, from a work perspective, and some of the next steps, I think it's not always articulated as well or resonates as well. And I think if you can connect the two, the why keeps you going in the tough moments, and that's very evident in the space. So I hope you planted a flag for South Africa at the top of
I hope
Kili.
I planted a flag for more women
And
here
for
to do it.
I think we're going to take a few questions now if we can, and then we will come back to some closing out statements. I've got questions from the audience as well, from a virtual side. Are there any questions in the room to start? Otherwise, I'll go with this one. We do have a roving mic. Okay, so let's go through the first one. We've all done amazing work in embedding DE&I in your respective organizations and in the communities you serve. What responsibilities are left behind for the next generation of leaders and of entrepreneurs? And off the back of that, anyone want to take it? Otherwise, I have some ideas on who to give it to. Because I think, Lee, if I can challenge you on the next generation of leaders, we've had some really good examples shared by Portia. We'll come to you, Liz, on entrepreneurs.
So from my perspective, we talk about organization, and the blueprint of an organization is called the operating model. And we said that the organization has to run in a certain way, tight supply chains, product, all the bits and bobs that need to come together. DE&I must be in the DNA of how we run the organization. If Lee leaves, or Portia leaves, or Liz or Linda left, the legacy is an institutionalized way of approaching D&I. So for me, it shouldn't be hey, when Lee was here, this is what he did. It's now embedded into our culture, into our strategy, into our ways of working. So the first thing is embed that into the operating model of how you work and run your organization. Secondly, leaders like myself think that we can run organizations in these big ivory towers. The pandemic has told us that we're all equally working from home, right? Mm-hmm. So in this now pseudo-egalitarian type society, how do you give everybody else common cause to believe, the purpose, the why? How do you give people the reason to believe? So, Linda can say, listen, I really want to believe, but the employer doesn't make me want to believe. So as the employer, we need to give people permission, the belief that their opinion, their commitment actually counts. So what we do in our organization is, as opposed to executives like myself leading the change, co-opt the employees to own the change and make it real for them. So it's one thing to say, hey, come up with 10 amazing ideas and then we shoot it down as leadership. Let them come up with the ideas, let's sponsor the ideas, and let them actually run with it. So now what you have is two components working together. Top down, you have an operating model that's open to, in the DNA, D&I being a thing. And secondly, the people that populate the operating model, which is the people you have today, they have the belief that says, actually, I will be heard. My ideas do count. I can be my true self to actually want to step up and do it. So when I talk about having 68% non-whites in my organization, or having a 50-50 leadership team, I've given people the belief system that says, as a young woman joining the organization, I could be a future leader. I could replace Lee as a woman. And we then get to the point where we start to promote this at a cultural level. And as we said, cultural is a habit, it's a commitment, it's a behavior. It's how we show up every day. It isn't the thing we do between 12 and 1 on Fridays, right?
It's interesting, they say you can't change your DNA sequence, but epigenetics says that how your genes interact with the environment can change. So you're creating an environment that changes what your DNA makeup could play out like, which I love. Liz, on an entrepreneur side, short and sharp?
I think what is important is that from an entrepreneurial perspective, every business that we make or that we create or that we lead needs to have a fundamental need to restore lost dignity of whoever's dignity was lost, in this particular case, then women. I think if the founding principle of the problem that is solved touches that, inherently the operations will follow. Inherently, the way in which people in a particular organization treat each other will follow. You cannot want people to behave in a certain way on a day-to-day basis when the very business that they're in is against the values. So I think that's definitely what I would say about entrepreneurship in business.
So restoring the dignity, giving people an opportunity to be seen, which actually transitions really nicely into another question we got, which I'd like to position to you, Portia. It says, and off the back of your earlier examples as well, how do we avoid feeling invisible? How do we put ourselves forward to showcase our talents without seeming arrogant, especially in a hierarchy-driven environment where maybe you're not part of what the stereotypical success factor would look like?
I mean, I have two kids, 25 and 21. And I will tell you, I don't know that there's anything other than getting yourself heard. Who cares if you're seen as arrogant? And yeah, you'll singe your bum here and there because you are going to be wrong on occasion. But that's life. I don't know, I mean, if having never been given permission for anything that I've ever done, I've just done it. It's there, do it. I never understand in an organization when somebody sort of like feels like, yeah, but I wanted to do it and I didn't. Just get in there and do it. The thing when I was thinking, the one thing, if you ask me, what is, and I don't like not paying homage to the woman, but I pay homage to all my ancestral women, but I want to pay particular homage to my father, my late father. Strong women are made by their fathers. That's my lived experience. As a kid, my dad would say, oh, you look beautiful. And so I never needed no man to tell me I'm beautiful. Right? My dad had sorted out that. And he'd say, I love you. And then my dad always said, you can do anything and be anything. And I say that as an important reminder, Lee and Theo and the men in the room. And also you women who have babies or whatever it is, you have to, for a girl, a dad is the one lodestar for what it is to be treated decently and with love. And when somebody looks in your eyes, there's magic in theirs, right? Because immediately you know that somebody sees magic in you, you know that you're made of magic, right? So for me, this thing that you must wait for permission, it doesn't come, yeah? It never has. And I suppose, I think there's a sense in which we've all become the part of my struggles, and that's why I call a friend on this stuff, because I don't understand it. I call Palisa and she's got a call, and then other women as well. And so I don't understand this stuff, but I know for a fact that these limitations do exist. I know. So I don't say, because I don't understand it, it doesn't mean to say that I know they exist. There are some I see as well. And I do think that it's about, when Linda was going for responsibility, I thought she's going to call us all out on another thing as well, is that I've always said that to be powerless is corrupt. To give yourself the permission to say, oh, I'm small, I'm powerless, it's a corrupt, cowardly act.
Yes.
It is. And so I also hold the standard that if the thing is not treating you right, you stand up and act from that position.
And I think what you've said there is that it takes a person to believe in you, whomever that may be, a father figure, a mother figure, a friend, it depends on the individual, that then actually sees that spark and continuously says it is there so that you can believe in yourself. And sometimes people haven't had that in their opportunity. But I love that story about never having had to ask for permission, but being conscious that others haven't experienced that same space. And I suppose when you're conscious of that, it's about creating an environment that allow others to be brave enough to stand up, step out. I think my daughter has a mantra. I have 3 boys and a girl, and they all say it. I'm brave, I'm bold, I'm beautiful. And then the boys add, and strong. So it's all relative. But I do think there's something about going out there that says, actually, the world is yours. And in some forums, it's just as hard in terms of diversity and equity, because they do say you can be anything to our daughters, and sometimes we are very deliberate about our sons, look after her.
Yes.
So it's an interesting construct, but I like your piece around not being powerless, and how do you empower yourself? Lee, quickly before we do our
Very
wrap-up.
quickly, I think not every young girl child will have that role model, right? And sometimes in the context of our communities, we find there are no role models. So part of these conversations to give light to the need for the conversation, because sometimes we need to go beyond our families, beyond our businesses, to show women, to show diversity groups, there is potential, there's an opportunity out there. It won't always be easy, but I think we all have a role which to co-contribute to the bigger outcome here.
Be that someone. And I think with that, because we've only got, we've got one last question, so we'll take it. There are other questions from the virtual platform. We will answer them. Thank you for your contribution. We have one in the room.
Hi. Sanbonani. What a beautiful, wonderful discussion. I didn't expect it to be so raw. I thought we were going to keep it fluffy. But
Thank you.
I just want to know, just practically within organizations, how can women within an organization help break barriers between races and improve inclusivity? Because, no offense, I mean, the biggest support that I've got within my career has been from Black women. I'm sitting with my boss. She's absolutely amazing. I have grown tremendously from her. I can count in my hand the support that I've been getting from white women. So how can we break those barriers and move from us versus them to us? Because we are all women and we share so much in common even though we are different. But how can we, practically, how can we help break that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take that because it's something that I've experienced. Thank you for that question as well. I think the one thing you got to celebrate that you already got the support of your Black women peers, because as a start there isn't many of that. So we must look and say, hold on, let's celebrate that I've got my peers who I feel comfortable with, who I can share ideas with, who can be there for me. What you can't change is the biases of others. And my response to you is you continue with your peers, continue being yourself, doing the amazing things that you do, put yourself forward in an authentic manner, okay? And just let it be. Because the one thing that I can't do is I can't change the bias of someone. I mean, Portia's spoken about it. I can't change them. All I can do is demonstrate what I can be. And to my point earlier on, if you in a setup where you're not being invited to the dance floor, as Joe has mentioned, then go there and say, may I come to the dance floor? If you're invited to the dance floor and you're dancing and you're not good at it, so be it. So that's my response to that.
And maybe to be okay to, when I say fail forward, move as long as you're moving. Failure is just when you stop. So if you step into the arena, and also put your hand up. So I've gone through spaces where people didn't realize that they weren't supportive of the bias until you made them aware. then they were properly conscious, and as a consequence could contribute. So often it works both ways, around the ownership in your space, and also, can I chat to you? I don't feel supported, and this is why. Because people don't necessarily always know. Now we're close to wrap up.
So I do want to treat that slide, because it's a factor. I was once in a situation where I needed data really badly to do, because I was responsible for daily press releases on where the rand was going to, and I was taking a white woman's job basically, and no one in the market would give me the data. No one would give me the data. I don't know how I solved the problem, but it got solved. But it made me reflect a little about this, and I think for me it's a bigger issue about what they do with women is they put us all into a small little peg, right? And they make the space small. And because it's small, we've got to compete, right? And so you've got this thing is that you can't give, right? Is that I do think it's the responsibility of companies to get them to understand that generosity is essential. This idea, you hear it all the time, is that whenever you talk, even the core criticism about BEE is about the fact that black people are taking all of the opportunities from white people. That's the thinking behind it. You've got to, if you're not going to deal with it, if you don't go to the root cause, go there. It's ugly, but go there. Because once you unearth that and you force the company to deal with what they're doing to women as a collective, you might be able to get beyond that point.
And I think the point on compete is key, right? It's about getting there together. It's not a handout, it's not a handout, it's a hand up. And we talked about this. If you're the only person in the boardroom as a woman, it's not an accolade. No. Who did you bring with you? Who is observing? Who's next? Absolutely. How do you take that? So the competition and the fact that actually it's not about that, it's about creating space is very different. So have the conversation. Conscious of time because we have to wrap up. We have 4 minutes left. And with that, I would like you each to give me one golden nugget, and it's going to be like a rapid fire thing. So this is your elevator pitch to the ladies and the gentlemen in this room. If they have to walk away with something, 1 minute, and the gong will go. We'll start with Linda. We started with you, not fair. Lee, you out the starting blocks.
So in the end, you get to choose your happiness. You're in charge of your happiness. Make a choice to be in an environment that's good for you, that promotes the values that you have inside. If it doesn't, walk away. Right? Walk away. What the pandemic has taught me is that I have choices, you have choices. Choose happiness.
Love that. Liz?
I think 3 things. One is to the decision makers in the room and to people with resource, give women opportunities and give them business deals. I, as a businesswoman, get invited to so many speaking opportunities and platforms, which matters. But when it's time to get into the boardroom and make deals, very seldom am I invited. Change that for those who can. 2 is once you bring in women into your organizations to work with you, give them the opportunity to fail meaningfully. Everyone deserves to fail and also rectify their mistakes and grow. Treat women with dignity. And lastly, I think, see women as human beings. The only reason why women oftentimes are left behind is because there's society standing in the way, not because they don't have it in them to actually move forward.
Human first always. Linda?
Be bold, make change. Be bold with yourself. Go and have that difficult conversation where biases are not good. Go and do wonderful things. Go and climb mountains. Go and do all sorts of things with yourself. Make change. When we help others, others help us. So go and make change with your family. Go and make change with your colleagues. Go and make change with your husbands, your parents, and your community. So that's it for me.
Be the pebble. Cause the ripple. Portia?
Cliche. Fake it until you make it. Fake it, girl. Just fake it. And don't worry, eventually we'll think you it. And we will know, that day when we think you it, we'll know you it.
And you will be it. I'd like to see the attitude when you walk out of here in the spaces. But thank you very much for the honest conversation as we wrap up. Moving from once-off DI initiatives to making a part of our DNA, because genetics, if we get it right, we can change the shape of what that looks like. We've got a playbook. The question is, how do you make that lived? It shouldn't just be a playbook. There are definitely still gaps. And next year when we meet again, let it be about the good news stories we share. The empowerment, the enablement, the pieces where we've shifted the dial, changed the framework, changed the conversation for better. So it is be bold, make the change, break the bias, and maybe taking a leaf out of a 15-year-old's book. Anne Frank wrote, and I love this, how wonderful is it that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Bless you. And with that, until next year, thank you so much from myself, from our esteemed panel. Those of you online will miss the rest of the conversation, which will no doubt continue. To the audience in the room, from Theo, the Carney team, thank you for joining us today, for your frank input, for sharing of yourselves. And that's it to us. Over and out from Johannesburg, off to Milan in Italy. Enjoy continuing the conversation. Thank you and goodbye. And just as we close out on the online piece, I think what's really important, there are a few exceptional people in this room I have to ask to stand. Carrie is already standing. Nortando, please could you get up? Devani, Basani, Lee, where are you? I'm looking, there we go. Up you get. I know that everyone's on high chairs. These ladies, Griffin at the back and all of the team at HWB have worked incredibly hard to get us here today. A very special thank you to each of you. And outside of COVID protocols, I will hug you when I see you later. So thank you very much to the panel. It's a pleasure. We will transition to lunch on the balcony. Please spend some time networking. We've got the rest of your questions. I think you've got the most esteemed individuals here with very honest feedback, real life scars, but also here to make sure you leapfrog and not learn lessons twice. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you.